Welcome to the Athlete CEO Podcast. Each week, we aim to bring you world-class interviews with the brightest, most successful entrepreneurs, innovators, athletes, and business minds today to share insights on how to leverage your wealth for maximum impact in all areas of your life. You won't be hearing any vague theories or strategies from us. Our guests have walked the walk and are committed to sharing the best of what they know so you can apply the lessons that they have learned, sometimes the hard way. Whether you're an athlete, entrepreneur, or just curious what drives the success of these guests, this podcast is for you. Now, let's get to the show.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Athlete CEO Podcast. We are excited for our guest this week. This is a podcast where we cover a lot of what it takes to be at the top of your game, to be elite, to be a high performer, whether that's in the world of sports, it's in the world of business, and it's one of those things that we know you can't just wake up overnight and be elite. You can't just wake up overnight and be a champion. And so much of what goes into being elite is really not the result, but it's the process. And we are pumped up to have a conversation with an expert coach who has led World Series champion New York Yankees, has worked with some of the best CEOs and Wall Street traders out there. And so with that introduction, let's welcome Coach Dana Cavalea to the podcast. Dana, thanks for being on with us.
Thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so I'm super excited to have this conversation. And one of the reasons is, as a former athlete, or as athletes, Brandon and I, we realize how much goes into performance beyond just the current act, whether that's, hitting or pitching or throwing a football, or even in the world of business of closing the deal. Is it really becomes performance is multifaceted. And so I would love to hear you just talk about, from a very high level, we use these words of performance, of champion, but a lot of times there isn't a clear definition. Can you help our audience just define, before we jump into this conversation, what exactly is performance and how you define being a champion?
I define it simply as this. You need to be better tomorrow than you are today. And the next day, if you take that formula and you play it out day after day, at the end of a calendar year, you should be better that year than you were the year before. And that's really what it is. But part of becoming better is knowing where it is that you need to be better. Where are you weak? Because during times of pressure, that's when weakness typically shows itself. So the word performance is definitely thrown around quite a bit today. Everybody's a performance expert. Everybody says you got to meditate, you have to do gratitude exercises, and there's a host of other things that you need to do as well. Put butter in your coffee and all these different things that are out there. But that's not really what performance is. These are all things that people try and attempt to use to better performance. But for certain people, those things don't work. So when that person adopts those things and does them over a calendar year, they're not better. They could actually be worse. So you have to know what it is that works for you and what works to close your own gaps that will get you better next year by being better tomorrow. And when you can do that year over year, you look back on your decade and you say, wow, I have truly enhanced my performance. So you don't enhance performance by taking a pill or a vitamin once. You get better over time if you're doing the right things. And it's up to coaches and yourself to help you figure out what those right things are.
That's a very helpful definition and framework around the conversation. One of the things that you hit on there is, it seems like today performance or life coach, right, are these buzzwords. And in an information age where we see content, authority, and leadership, there are a lot of opinions out there, but I would say also not a lot of true experience or practical knowledge. And I think it'd be great for our audience to hear a little bit about your journey of why, this isn't just another example of somebody who got a life coach certification or is a high performance coach, but this is your ethos, and you have years and years of experience of being exposed and helping some of the best in the world from an athletic standpoint, and the CEO is, can you take us through your journey a little bit? I love really starting at you interning for free while you're a student at the University of South Florida for the New York Yankees. Can you just walk us through your journey of starting there to where you're at today?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a New York bred. You may be able to hear it at times, with the accent. But yeah, I was a New York kid. I decided to leave the cold weather and the Big Apple and head down to the land of palm trees. And really, I had a vision for myself when I was always a big baseball fan. I played a year at Queens College in New York, which was a D2 school, and I hated every minute of it. I didn't like the culture. I didn't like the weather. There were just a lot of things. So I said, I'm going to challenge myself, and I'm going to leave New York. I'm going to go down to the University of South Florida in Tampa, and I'm going to try to walk onto this team down here. And I wish I had a fairy tale ending for you, but I don't. I went down there. I met with the coach, and he said, hey, son, our team's been picked, and we don't have open tryouts. So we do have an intramural team you can play on if you're interested. But I have nothing to do with that. So I made a decision at that point. I was 19, and I said, well, my dream of being a ball player, it quickly eroded. And deep in my heart, I knew I didn't have the talent to get to that next level and take that next step to go to the minors and to the pros. So I made a decision. I said, what do you love to do? And I loved training for the game. I loved practice, and I loved training, as sick as that may sound. I said, well, what can I do with that? So I actually met with an advisor. I went to school to become an athletic trainer. And quickly I said, I don't want to just deal with athletes when they're hurt. What can I do to get on the front end to help them build performance, maybe so they could resist getting hurt physically? And I remember an advisor said, well, you can go to school and become a strength and conditioning coach. And I said, that sounds really cool. And it brought me back to a memory I had. My parents are both school teachers. I remember being in 8th grade and going to a Yankee game and sitting, in the nosebleed section, where if you look down, you see the field, and if you look straight ahead, you see aircraft. So I was that high up, and I saw this guy in the outfield on the right field line, and I said, what does that guy do? Look at him. All the players are engaging with him. They're laughing. He's helping them get ready for the game. That's really cool. And I left it at that. Years later, I had this conversation with the advisor, and I said, well, what is a strength and conditioning coach? And she described to me exactly what that guy was. So it was sort of this gap that was closed. And from that point, I said, well, that's what I want to do. So after that meeting, I met with the head strength and conditioning coach, Ron McKeefery, over at the University of South Florida. Said, hey, I'm young, I'm raw, I know nothing about how to train athletes for performance, but I would love you to teach me. And I got an internship, worked with the football team, and I'm a baseball guy through and through. But I learned a lot. And come February, Yankees come to town. I drive my beat-up old Mazda 929 hoopty over to the ballpark, spring training complex, park a mile and a half away because I can't afford parking, and walk up to the main office, and I say, I'm Coach Dana Cavalea, and excuse me, I got to go back half a step. I park a mile and a half away today, and I'm watching through a chain link fence spring training. And I'm watching players like Derek Jeter, Mariano Rivera, you name it. And here I am, a New York kid, and I'm amazed by that. So anyway, that day I go back to my internship after taking a bunch of pictures, through the chain link fence. And Ron McKeefery, the head strength coach, calls me in his office at USF and says, hey, I just got a call from the head strength coach with the Yankees, and he's looking for a guy to basically hand out towels, clean the weight room, and watch the players while he's on the field. Would you have any interest in that? And I said, absolutely. So I got in that same hoopty I told you about, the Mazda 929, but this day I got to park real close. And I had my own parking spot, and now I walk into the office, and they say, you Coach Dana, are you Dana Cavalea? And they said, yeah. And I said, yeah. And they said, well, come with us. They put a credential around my neck, C for clubhouse, F for field access, walked me into the clubhouse, put me in Yankee gear, and next thing you know, I'm in the middle of that field I was taking pictures of a day earlier. So for me, very quickly I learned you could be in 24 hours, you can go from one side of the fence to another. You can go from fan and spectator to, right on that field, whatever your playing field may be. And that was really where my high performance journey started. It was, I was a 19-year-old kid, And I had to make a decision right there if I wanted to be your typical 19-year-old kid or if I wanted to seize the opportunity that I had in front of me. And that came with a lot of sacrifice and a lot of choices that I had to make in order to climb that ladder.
Yeah, and I think for our audience that aren't familiar with the inner workings of at least of how professional baseball works, is it's not glorious, right? As former minor league players, I think of the sacrifice that the strength and conditioning staff made, and you know, I was in pro ball around the time that you started, and it's interesting deal on two waves is today now you see the strength and conditioning component of professional athletes, and it's front and center, but it was really an untapped area back in the early 2000s where it was still a new thing. But at the same point, the strength coach, was one of the few people within the organizations that I would say was on the player side. Oh, yeah. And that might sound strange, but what I want to dig into and love is I know as a player, we really trusted the strength and conditioning coaches in a different way than maybe the front office or the coaches. You really didn't feel like you had to be so careful of what you said to them. You guys were really advocates for the athlete. And so I think just that trust happened so quick. I would love to hear your accelerated pathway. So you end up being the head performance coach at 23. How does that happen? Were you scared? Did you feel qualified? Walk us through that.
Well, a couple things. Number one, I will definitely agree with you. The strength coach, it's our job to have the back of the players because, we don't determine playing time. So we have a very special relationship with players in that it's saying, hey, I have to meet you where you are. Here's where you are today, and what does getting better look like to you? What does better tomorrow look like to you today? And how do we help you get there? And how do I support you along your journey? So the strength coach is one of the few coaches on a staff that is a player's coach. Truly, we're players' coaches, and we're there to help you maximize your performance every day, both physically, and any person that's worked with a strength coach knows there's a big mental component to that. Because I got to get you in to work with me and do something that doesn't feel good, which is physical training. But at the same time, I also have to let you know that I'm here for you for anything else that you need, anything that's bothering you, whether it's at home, whether it's on the field, whatever. We are a very important part of a player's support system. And that's really, again, where my journey started to accelerate again, because I realized very quickly the importance of relationships. So when I first started, was I fearful? Was I nervous? Absolutely. I didn't know anything. I didn't know anything. I was just getting started in my field. But the one thing I knew is people. And it's like life is a bar. It's your job to tend it. So I just started working with players. How you doing? I didn't need anything from them or want anything from them. So I got a chance because I didn't have anything to really give them. So I had a chance to really get to know them as people. And this was around the time when functional training and core training was just beginning. And I knew that if I got to know that material and what that was and how to teach functional training and core training better than the next guy, I would be able to gain a competitive advantage with the player. So a player would walk in and I'd say, hey, can I take you through some core? And that's where I started. And a player would say, yeah, I'll let you take me through that. And I'd give him some exercises that were unique and he hadn't used or seen before. And that was it, because I had no more tools in my chest after that. And over time, core training would say, hey, can I show you another exercise? And it would be another exercise, functional, something different than just a squat, a lunge, or whatever. And then the trust started to build over and over again. But ultimately, I got my break when I was able to look at everything objectively as a hungry and eager college student that didn't want to leave this opportunity and get a real job. And I said, what's an angle here? And I realized that players at that point were really starting to get paid some good money, and the organizations wanted as much information on these players as possible so they could protect their investment. So at that point, I became an asset manager of human capital, and I said, I got to come up with a screening process that identifies risk. And that's what I did. I created what I called my player profile, where we measured, how much motion a player has in their shoulders and their hips, core strength. I measured, if their glute was working, muscle testing, all that. And it was very, very progressive at the time. Nobody was doing that. So I walked it up to our GM and I said, Cash, could I sit with you and go over something? And I relentlessly would go up to him, get his feedback, and come back with something new. And I was just an intern at the time. But anyway, a year later, I ended up getting hired as an assistant. And 3 months into the season, Phil Hughes is throwing a no-no down in Texas on a hot summer night. And in the 7th inning, he blew out a hamstring, which was like the 7th hamstring of the year. And at that point, Brian Cashman calls me in his suite at the hotel the next morning and says, hey, I just want to let you know I let the head guy go. And, would you have any interest in being the new interim head strength coach? And I said, well, absolutely. And I sort of hold my breath. I walk out the door and I'm like, Dad, you're not going to believe this. I'm the head guy. So that was my journey. It was totally wild. And that same day, I remember Jason Giambi, Jorge Posada, and Jeet all coming up to me and saying, hey, we got you. We got you. So just do your thing and we got you. And they did. And I went from interim to head guy within a couple of weeks. They all went to bat for me, and that was it. The rest was history.
Wow, Coach, what a phenomenal path to obviously get to that point and using the skills that you had. One thing that I love your terminology of really human capital. I mean, we use the same internally and can't stress that enough. And I can't be, more struck by hearing your description of your path and the other side of human capital, right? Which is the mental side. And it sounds like you come very much from a growth mindset. And I think we've all been around enough players to know that even at the elite level, we have, those that capitalize on that growth mindset and then some of those that just, have a more passive mindset. So I'd love to hear, if that's something that you incorporate into your training or evaluation of players, and how has that evolved over time?
It is. I call it a champion's mindset, because for me, it was always about at the end of the year winning that championship and being a part of that championship team. So for me, I try to approach every day and teach those that I work with to approach life with a champion's mindset. What does that require you to do and be? It requires you to do things that the average person doesn't do. It encourages you and forces you to be somebody that's different than everybody else, because champions are different than everybody else. So you have to act different, be different, present yourself different. And when you do those things, you get different results than everybody else, which is what champions do, which is what high performers do. So the other thing is, when it comes to champions mindset, growth mindset, you can't get attached to things, because attachment stimulates emotion. And emotion at times, yes, it could be good, but emotion oftentimes when it comes to decision making is not that great. And I'm talking about emotion where you're so biased towards something. It's like emotion that's different than instinct and gut. It's like emotion where your gut's saying do this and the emotion is telling you to do that. So it clouds your, that champion's mindset. It inhibits growth. So that's what I work on a lot with those that I work with. The physical is definitely heavily connected to your mindset and mentality, and they go hand in hand. So you could say, hey, I work on my mindset all the time, but I'm 25 pounds overweight. That's going to be what weighs down your growth and champion's mindset. So we have to get that right in order to activate the mental side, and maximize it.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I'd love to hear you dig into a little bit. Obviously, we're hitting a lot on the athlete, and we probably could all find examples of athletes that had the ability, then they combine it with the mindset, right? They do the extra. They do a little bit more than the average. But I think it's fascinating. The other part of our audience here are CEOs, founders, investors, et cetera. I know you have, a significant part of your practice that deals with that clientele as well. But I think that our segment focuses so much on this mental side, trying to find the mental edge. But you just hit on it. We forget about the physical side of it and how much that impacts things. So it's not just athletes that have to worry about the physical. It sounds like you're making the analogy to everybody else as well. True?
Yeah, I am, because I have a stable of type A high horsepower CEOs that are hungry, they're competitors, and they're playing the most competitive sport in the world, which is business, right? The most brilliant minds are playing. There's some just very intelligent people that are willing to sacrifice, that are playing that game. How are you going to win? And you win as an executive, as a leader, by first defining what winning means to you. I can't tell you how many people I work with when you say, hey, they say, do you want to win? They say, yeah, I want to win. Well, what does that mean to you? And there's silence. They don't know what winning truly means. They can give you the revenue targets that they're looking to hit with their company, but they forget the targets that they're trying to hit for themselves. And I can't tell you how many CEOs I work with that they wake up when they have a cardiovascular event, heart attack, they need stents, something. They work like dogs, and then they resist, the physical and the mental training. And then all of a sudden something happens, and now all of a sudden they've changed their life. So business today, it's a 365. For some, it could be a 24/7 type game. But I work with people in a way that shows them how to maximize their performance without letting business get the best of them, but allowing them to show up each day with their best to their business.
It makes a lot of sense. And I'm just curious, practically, if we could get even to just nuts and bolts, what's that look like? I walk into your office, or we nowadays jump on a Zoom call, and I'm a new coachee, right? I run a business. I've got, a young family, former athlete. So I've got that competitive streak, but a lot on the plate. Like, how do you walk somebody through this? I mean, what does a coaching experience look like? And how should people think about this?
Well, coaching, what's great about it is this, you make the decision when you start being coached that you're not going through life on your own. And that's a big thing, because think about most leaders, right? Most leaders are really control freaks, and they have a hard time working with other people, like, openly. And they get to a point where they get burnt out, they get super stressed, and they say, hey, you know what? It's probably time for me to get some help, and I become the help. So for me, I make sure, one thing I make sure is I don't treat it like a psychology practice. I don't put you on the couch. We don't do that. But what I do is the same thing that I did as a 19-year-old, is I get to know who you are. I get to know what's important to you. When you talk about performance, what does performance look like through your lens? What does winning look like through your lens? Because winning to me and winning to a client and winning to you, it's different. So sometimes clients can't even identify what winning means to them, like I said. So we have to come up with that. So the first part of this is building a relationship. You can't coach anybody until you have a relationship with that person. That person has to be open and honest with you, and sometimes it takes a few calls to get there. That's what I do. I allow the flower to open as it is comfortable opening. I don't force it, and that's a big mistake. So it's a relationship first, and then what I do is I start to help you identify right now, what is the elephant in the room? What's the one thing that if you work on and improve today will help you get to that goal of winning as per your definition? And for some, it's physical. Hey, I got to lose 25 pounds. I feel like crap. For some, it's I have to stop smoking. For some, it's, hey, I can't sleep at night. For others, it's, I'm having difficulty with my spouse. For others, it's like today, I'm having difficulty with my kids. I was talking to somebody today. We have to meet people where they are. And when we address things in that way, we're addressing the most important thing to them right now. And that's how you can get instant results with people. But you can't get those results until you know who these people are and you can build a relationship. It's the same thing with people and their money. I have to know what you want to do with your life before I can tell you, I'm speaking as you, what to do with your money. It's the same thing. And then what you do is you custom curate plans for people that they can follow. And then once again, everybody's different. I work with a guy that runs, he's got almost $15 billion under management right now. And he hates structure. He doesn't want to be put in boxes, and he wants to be free. But he has goals that he wants to hit. So you work with him very different than you would somebody that's very type A, analytical, chart-driven. It's two different people. And if you treat one like the other, you lose them.
So helpful. I mean, it relates absolutely to the conversations we have about our clients' net worth, that first and foremost, it's all integrated, but money's not really the goal, right? It's what do you want your money to do for you, which becomes clarity of mission, vision, purpose, values, those type of things. And so I agree wholeheartedly and see even our conversations with our clients who are founders or our clients who are professional athletes it is scary how many of them don't have clarity on defining what winning is. And one of the things I'd heard you mention on a previous podcast was, falling into this trap of working more, right? Whether that's, as we know in the historic, in the athlete world, it was I've got to be the first to the field and the last to the leave, or in the office of I've got to be the first in and the last to leave. Can you provide some clarity on maybe where that's a breakdown? Obviously, you have to put the work in. I think that's a conversation of consistency and reps as well. But one of the things that I see a big mistake on, that I know I'm guilty of I try to change everything at once. I try to be the best in all 5 areas, right, of mindset, of training, fueling, recovery, influence, trying to tackle too much at once. What advice would you give on where to start, amount of hours, that conversation?
I start with this, right? If you own your schedule, you own your life. And that means you have to truly own your schedule. And a lot of people have a hard time doing that. So what they do is they have an open schedule, which means I'm open and available all the time. And if you're open and you're available all the time, it's very difficult to perform optimally, right? So for me, I always say, what are you doing with your time, and why do you keep allocating so much time to your business, and why are you allocating very little time to these other things that are really important in your life? And what you realize is it stems from really what I feel is like the origins of business years ago, where it was fear-driven. It's survival. Like when you're an entrepreneur, it's either hunt or be hunted, and that's the way it feels. So I believe that is within people, and it just is the reason why they keep working and working and working, and they're always on and they're always available. And that becomes super, super dangerous over time, because, there's all this talk about work-life balance, and most entrepreneurs that I work with, they're like, that doesn't exist. It's BS. And in a lot of ways, you're going to sacrifice a lot being an entrepreneur. There's no doubt, but that doesn't mean you can't do other things. And that doesn't mean that when you're doing those other things, you have to be thinking about all the issues that you're having either at work, with personnel, or with revenue, and everything in between. So when we can get people to have a clear open and a clear close to their day, clear start, clear stop, they know what that game looks like. I start at 9, I end at 5, just saying, throwing those times out. But I wake up at 5. So that means I have 4 hours of personal time to get done what I need to get done. Then I go to work, I play the game hard, and at 5 o'clock I wrap and I go to bed at 10. So I got another 5 hours on the back end. And what we do is we start filling in the front end and filling in the back end, so these folks have a complete day and they don't feel like they always have to be on all of the time, because everything is compartmentalized correctly and they're nailing it, much like you would if you were a student. When you go to grade school, you're going through 6 subjects in a day, and gym and music, and think about all that you get done in such a short period of time. And you have time to play sports, etc. That's exactly what we do with people, to help them own their schedule and help them own their life, and then they can own their results.
That was, the practicality was very helpful there. Even you talking about like a clear start, a clear stop, and having designated times within your schedule for specific things that you've proactively planned out. That's very, very helpful. Can you talk about your time with the Yankees, right? You had exposure to not just professional athletes. Let's be honest here, right? That New York Yankees team, you've got Mariano Rivera, arguably the best closer ever. From a mindset standpoint, I'd love to hear about that. But then you've got Jeter, you've got A-Rod, you've got these different individuals. Can you maybe share what made them so different as elite performers in a world where everybody's talented, right? You've got high performers and underperformers in the major leagues. What was their difference? How did they own their schedule? How did they approach their performance that we as business people and athletes should glean from that experience?
Yeah, a couple things. Number one, those names that you just mentioned, and there was a host of others, they were companies in themselves. I mean, 300 million, 200 million. I mean, they were companies, and they acted as such. So the Derek Jeter brand, the Mariano Rivera Inc., they behaved like some really, really, well fine-tuned companies. And what did that start with? With them, these guys had such great routines. They had such great habits. But the one thing that they did differently, they're the professionals versus the amateur players. They were not overworking. It was amazing because I come from the school, or I was brought up in the school. If you're not working, somebody else is. If you're not out there grinding, somebody else is, and they're going to beat you. So when I got to the big leagues, I started to study the habits of these players, Jeter, A-Rod, Posada, all of them. And I said, these are the highest earners. They all have 10 plus years in the league, which is a very difficult league. And they're successful and consistent year over year. And when the pressure rises, they get it done. They were all big situation, big time players. And I said, well, how do they do that? What do they do differently than everybody else? So I started to study their behavior. And I said, well, what time do they get to the ballpark? And I'd see rookies and I'd see guys with, 1 to 5 years. They'd get to the ballpark at around 1 o'clock to eat free lunch. That's what they would do. Then I'd say, well, what time do these guys start getting to the ballpark? And Derek Jeter, all those guys, they would arrive between 2:45 and 3:15. Now, the younger players, the amateur players, would get to the ballpark, they'd eat, and they would sit around until about 2:30, 2:45, sometimes 3. Then I'd watch a guy like Jeter. He walks in, he gets immediately undressed, goes and sits and soaks in hot water, moves to the training room, dries off, gets in his training gear. Monday, Wednesday, Friday comes and trains with me physically, gets out of that, puts on his pants, and goes and starts his tee work and his cage drills. When he got to the ballpark, when Mariano got to the ballpark, when Pettit got to the ballpark, it's name after name. They all got there around the same time and got right to work. There wasn't too much hanging around and chit-chat and all that. They had a plan, and they executed on their plan, which is the same as when you go into your day with, call it a to-do list, a kill sheet, a execution list, whatever you want to call it. How good do you feel when you just go boom, 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 boom? And that's the way they approached every day. And then bang, game time starts, same warm-up routine. Everything's consistent, same behaviors. Game ends, post-game routine, and they're out the door. So their day, from wake-up time to shutdown and everything in between, was totally structured and repetitive, which means they were consistent. And they were more consistent than everybody else. Now, you combine consistency with talent, ability, and instincts, and you have a very, very, very successful player. And that's what I saw over and over and over again. And here's the last part. Their identity was not that of Derek Jeter, baseball player, Roger Clemens, baseball player. Their identity was Derek Jeter. Derek Jeter. You know what I'm saying? And I remember I was sitting on the field in 2007 with Roger Clemens, and he said, D, I want to let you know something. He goes, playing baseball and being a pitcher, it's what I do, but it's not who I am. And I find a lot of leaders get in trouble when their identity becomes their position or the company that they lead, or they base their self-security on their revenues for the year or how they did for the quarter, or, if they went public or not, or, you know what I'm saying, where their stock price is. That's so dangerous. And that's what creates obsessive work ethic in a dangerous way. When you start allowing these externals to dictate who you are and how you go about your business. These guys went about their business the same way, through good and through bad, with minor adjustments.
There's so much gold in that you just shared with us, and I highly encourage the audience is Coach has actually written a book called Habits of Champion. Nobody becomes a champion by accident. That has countless of these stories and experiences. So very practical. Obviously, we'll have show notes. We'll link to his book. But if you really want to dig into what are really these habits that are distilled down from the best in the world, this is like a must read book. One of the things that I've heard you talk about is also simplicity, connecting it to identity. One of the mistakes I see being made by a lot of our current athletes, or just even in the business world, and I get caught up in it, is this information overload with all the newest techniques, right? In baseball specifically, it's launch angle, it's analytics, it's all of these extra things. Can you talk about the fine line of like being intellectually curious, of trying to get better versus, trying to implement the next best thing? Because I see that as a very dangerous place where you don't really become a master of anything. Can you shed some light on that?
It is. Yeah. You have to, the biggest thing is, first off, you have to trust yourself as is, right? You have to look at it and say, hey, without any of these tools, I'm still great at what I do. I'm still great at this. Maybe I'm not great at everything right now, but this is what I am great at. This is what comes naturally to me. So now you know who you are, and you know the type of player you are. And I use the word player for in business and or sport, right? You know the type of player you are. That's awesome. Now, what I believe is I'm a 4-week test guy. I'm okay with you saying, hey, I want to try this for 4 weeks, and then I'm going to make a decision on it. Not 4 days, not 4 hours, and not even for four months, right? 4 weeks. And you will be able to make a decision. Has this helped me or has it not helped me? And the things that help you, you keep, and the things that don't, you toss. And you keep going at it like that until you find that balance between where you can say, hey, you know what? I have my routine. This works for me. I don't need anything else. And then that's how you build off of yourself, right? We don't want to build off of these things, right, that make up our routine. We want to build off of ourselves because we're dynamic. People aren't static. So knowing that we're dynamic, the things that work for us today won't work for us tomorrow, but we use them until they stop working for us, and then we can look for something else, maybe one other thing, switch that out for something that used to work that doesn't work anymore, and it's always a 4-week test. And when we can do that, we have 4 weeks. We can't take on 10 different things and test them all correctly in 4 weeks. So over the calendar year, you may test 12 different things, which is still a lot, but you're giving everything a fair shake, and you get to make a decision. How does this affect me? And things should affect, they should work within a month. You'll know if something works for you or if it doesn't. And part of working is, do I like this or do I not? Like, I could tell you to eat kale every day, but if you hate kale, it could be a superpower for you. But you're not going to eat it if you don't like it. So part of that 4-week test is this something that I see enough value in to where I'll be consistent, and I like it enough to be consistent in it. And when you 4-week micro test, you could do really well, and you could identify the things that work and the things that don't.
Coach, I think the thing that just keeps constant that I keep hearing this message is you got to know yourself. And I think that's what you're saying there. And even circling back to the Clemens comment, it's what I do, not who I am. I'd love to just have you dig some more into that process, or how much we see this identity crisis. I think all of us probably went through it when we stopped playing sport. Now you got to figure out who you are, or you got to figure out what you're going to do next. I'd just love to hear your tips, tools, tricks, whatever they might be, for really taking that time to understand who you are, how to evaluate those items you just went through, whether they're going to work for you or not, and how to get your identity out of something that is so important to us. Whether you're a business owner, I mean, let's face it, that is a significant part of your life. Or if you're an athlete, you've trained for this for 20 years. How do you develop that identity beyond some of those biggest things in your life?
Yeah, well, I think identity is interesting because it's, I look at life as a series of process. Everything's a process, and at the end of the process is a result. So it's like, I want to be a great CEO. Well, I mean, that's great. The CEO is just a title. What's your daily process? Everything comes down to a daily process. So if you get that right, the result will take care of itself. As we know, I'm sure many people have heard that before. But you don't have to identify with a title. I'd rather you identify with the process and these series of different processes that you have. Those processes make up who you are. So you're not actually a title. You're defined by the processes that you engage in every single day. And that's how I look at things. It's a different concept. It's like, yeah, I am a high performance coach, but these are the things I do every day that allow me to be comfortable with who I am as a person, which allows me to be a benefit to you. But I don't identify myself every day. I get up, I'm a coach. I'm a coach. I have to do this because I'm a coach. I do this because this is what allows me to perform optimally. And that's what I encourage people to do. Try not to be so focused on title, and don't be so glued to the outcome, right? Because what we do has to yield an outcome, right? And outcomes will either be positive or negative, but you could still be great at something and get a negative outcome. How do you pivot off of that negative outcome and make that negative a positive, right? It goes back to your process. You always have to go back to your process, and you either have a winning process or a losing process. So if you get a lot of losses and a lot of negatives, your process stinks. But if you get positive, 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 and an occasional negative, you probably have a pretty good process, because we can't bat 1,000 in anything that we do. There's days we wake up, you could have a great process, you work out, you eat right, you get massage, you get stretched, you meditate, you take hot baths, you float, you do all these things, but you still feel like crap on Wednesday morning. The body is dynamic. I mean, we're talking about cells, we're talking about energy, we're talking about atmosphere, we're talking about humidity, climate. There's so many factors that we can't control them all. So we have to control what we can control. And that always comes back to, what are we doing between our working hours and what are we doing on our resting hours? And taking a very good look at how attached we are to, number one, outcomes, and number two, title. So I know it's a little bit circular in my answer, but again, I always say, when you get too attached, to what you do, or the title of what you do, it becomes really dangerous, because you lose the rest of you. And without the rest of you, you lose your edge, and you're actually losing performance. So I've seen people that become so immersed in, you've seen it, in baseball, these career baseball men. They get to the point where they have no other skills in life. They can't even communicate outside of the game. But the same is true in the business world with some executives that are lifers. I mean, they're no longer have relationships with their significant other. They're terrible parents but they're always at work. And at the end of the day, you're going to get your little, banner that says, hey, thanks for your 30 years if you're an employee, or eventually there'll be a CEO that turns it over. And in 10 years, nobody will probably know who you are anymore, maybe 10 days. So you can't get attached to these things, right? You've got to have a great process. You have to have great core values, and you stick with them through thick and thin. And don't let anybody shake your values out of you.
Yeah, I think that's huge. I'd love to maybe even add a little controversy in here, because I've heard many times, I'm just not a process person, right? And I'm, that doesn't work for me. I view that, and maybe this is wrong, as you just don't understand what your process is. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, because to me, everybody has a process. I think you hit on it. It's just whether it's a good process or a bad process. But for those people that just claim, hey, I'm not a process person, what would you say to that?
I say it like this, right? The way you look at process is probably the issue, because a lot of people, when they think of process, they think of some anal retentive operator that his whole life is in his planner and he can't adapt to anything outside of that planner. That's not really what I'm talking about. I'm looking more of it like bumper bowling, where you got the bumpers so you don't go in the gutter, but you still got the whole lane where you can play, and you get to decide what's in that lane. But I got to put these bumpers up, which is the structure. And what happens within the lane is your process. You still have freedom. And for some people like that I coach, I got to dial their whole process in. They like it real tight, and they don't want any wiggle room. But like the gentleman I was telling you that oversees $15 billion, he likes to use the whole lane. So as a coach, that's what I'm saying. You got to meet people where they are. And for some people, process, it scares the piss out of them. And for others, it lights them up. So you got to know who you're working with. So if it's somebody that's freaked out by process, the last thing you're going to do is start to breathe down their neck and say, you have to do this. You got to do it this way. It's just giving them a little bit of structure by saying, hey, what are 5 things that you do every day that make you feel great? Their structure may be what I call the big 3 or the big 5. Give me 3 things that make you feel great, that you do every day that make you feel great. Maybe it's 5 things. that you do every day that make you feel good and feel great. Okay, we're going to do those every day. Can we do those Monday through Friday? Boom. There's your process. There's your structure. For somebody else, it's, well, what are those 5 things? Well, how do we get to those 5 things? And, so every person is different. A lot of visionary CEOs, you can't put them in a box. They'll hate you. But when you work with their potentially like co-founder, who is probably a little more process driven, organized, detailed, they love that stuff. So you got 2 different people. And how do you figure out who the person is that you're working with? You say, hey, let me see your schedule. And you'll see that detail-oriented person. They have their everything is in that schedule. When you look at their Outlook or you look at their Google Calendar, it's lit up, it's organized. And when you find the visionary one, there's a lot of space in it. There's canceled stuff in there. So you got to know who you're working with. And that's how you help people with process. And you can very quickly see who's afraid of it, maybe who's had a bad experience with process, and get them working in the right way. Everybody's different, and that's what makes it great. There's so many ways to build something great and become something great. There's not one trick.
I think that's huge. I think Erik and I both had to hit mute on our microphones there because you just described our company and him and I to a T on the differences there. And, I could see his text messages coming through telling me to stop trying to put him in a box and structure him out. So that was very, very hit home for us and resonates very much. And to go back to coaching, I think some practical advice for everybody. And most people don't know this about our company, but Erik and I, we had to bring a coach in years ago, which was one of the best things. It frankly maybe even saved our company when we were getting started out, because we just didn't know how to work together because we are so different in those ways that you just mentioned. But what we found is systems that work for each individually and ultimately that work for our company, and it's helped us to flourish. So I think just a testament to the power of coaching, but also the power of understanding, who you are and that people are different, and the way to approach process is different as well. So that resonates with us. I'm sure it's going to resonate with a lot of people out there.
Coach, I just want to echo what Brandon said. One of the things that highlighted to me is really what you're talking about, right, is this development of self-awareness and building new habits within how we're wired. One of the things I want to hit on that I'm so fascinated about is I'm a parent of a couple young kids, our third on the way. And you've written some books about champion kids, right? Raising championship families. And I just think it's always so interesting to me as I realize is how I'm trying to help form and shape our children. We as people, like you said, we're fluid. We're constantly changing. So it's really, we have to learn how to parent ourselves, right? Can you share a little bit about your raising championship families? Like, what was the impetus of that? How does it relate? We'd love to hear that, because I think for a lot of people hearing on this is we struggle through how do we instill so much of what we're talking about. We wish we would have had a program, right, when we were young, so we're not trying to undo bad habits and put new habits in. Talk to us a little bit about what this Raising Championship Families is.
Yeah, so I started a book series called Champion Kids, which is a really personal development for kids, but using sports as the teacher. Lessons from sports as the teacher, because I work with a lot of parents, and I see that, their kids can drive them crazy at times. They frustrate them. The parent has so much going on, and then they go home and they got another full-time job. And what I always say is, like, if you're an entrepreneur, you're running your own business, again, you have this natural instinct to solve problems and control things. And then you go home and you see these kids and you're like, I got to control them and I got to solve the problem. What I say is, listen, they'll grow out of the problem, but it's your job to give them good lessons and also give them encouragement. It's also your job to teach them about real things in life that they're going to face, right? Because that's what I see. I don't want to pick up with people on like the 50-yard line when they're like 40 or 50 years old and they're still dealing with things that could have been corrected when they were kids, or at least they could have been taught how to handle things when they're kids. So Champion Kids was really born out of trying to help the clientele that I work with their children and packaging the education in a kid's book. But there's two sides to it. I wrote it for the kids, but I also wrote it for the parents. And I haven't told anybody that until now. But really, that's what I did, because the parents, when they read the book, they're like, yeah, I probably should have a better outlook on my day. I get up hungry, but I also get up pissed off every day. Let me change my tune a bit, right? So that's why I wrote these books. And listen, parenting is difficult. I work with a lot of kids over the years, and I've seen how difficult that they could be with certain things. But what I've also learned is you can override their difficulty through your own surrender. So don't try to control and dominate. Actually go the other way. Release and surrender, and sort of let them open up and evolve in front of you. And I was working with a CMO for a company here in Westport, Connecticut, and he was telling me about his son and how he's starting to golf now, and he has this desire to constantly correct his son's swing. And I said, listen, don't say anything. You go and swing, hit your balls, and when you can get your son to the point where he says, hey, Dad, what do you think I should do for this? What do you think I should do for that? Am I holding the club right? That's when you're a champion parent, because your child is coming to you and asking for your advice. You're the hero in his story. But if you start choking the kid out in terms of his freedom and thoughts and everything else, or her thoughts, you're no longer going to be the hero. You're going to be the villain. And that's what we don't want to have happen, right? We always want the parent to be in that hero champion's position. And that's what I teach. Again, I always say there's always that elephant in the room. For some people, it's, hey, I need help dealing with my kid. What do you think? So everybody enters the coaching process through a different stream. Like I said, some it's weight loss, relationships, family, business, you name it. It's all connected.
Yeah, this was number one, convicting, helpful. One thing I think it's fitting as we close out this conversation is to bring back up Mariano Rivera. And he is a legend as far as having just this uncanny ability to be cool, calm, collected, and the biggest pressure situations, right? I mean, you're in New York, 27 championship World Series, and Mariano Rivera just seemed to think it was a walk in the park. Can you talk about these high pressure situations, how he continued to just be so dominant time and time again? I would just, I know you had a unique relationship with him, that you got to spend time with him every day prepping. Can you share a little bit about that, just relationship and what it takes to be elite in the most difficult situations?
I always share this story, whenever I speak. But Mo and I, we have a tight relationship, through the years, and he's one of the most amazing people. Just how he approaches life, everything is done professionally. And it reminds me of a story I always tell. Back in 1995, I was a young guy. I was still in high school, and this guy, comes up from the minor leagues to Yankee Stadium, and he leans, skinny kid from Panama, he leans back and he throws 95 to 97 miles an hour before it was a thing. And, he was very unassuming. And you watch him throw and you're like, wow, that caught my attention. That caught my eye. As a young guy trying to figure out life and who he is, that caught my attention. And year after year, he just kept getting better and better, right? He's the definition of a high performer. Better and better over time, year after year. And I remember just watching him over and over again. And it was a couple of years ago. I was at his house in Westchester. We live around the corner from each other. I said, Mo, I got to ask you a question. We were in his basement, and I was stretching him out. I said, I have to ask you a question. And he goes, what's that, buddy? I said, how do you do it, man? How do you do it? How do you get it done in the biggest of situations? And he says, buddy, I do three things. He goes, number one, I slow everything down. Number two, I quiet the noise. And number three, I throw one pitch at a time. Quiet the noise, slow it down, one pitch at a time. I said, wow, that's cool, but like, what about the big situations? And he goes, buddy, there are no big situations. every situation is the same. We decide what's a big situation. We decide what we give life to, but everything is exactly the same. He says, I control the way I feel. I control the volume. I control what I hear. I control what I see. I control what I focus on. But everything is exactly the same. And that was like profound advice for me, because how many times do we try to adapt to situation? And it's like, what if you don't adapt to the situation and you just stay true to who you are and you allow who you are to sort of blossom within that situation, and you approach situations with with truly who you are, and you don't try to adapt to things, become so transient to your own self. And that's what a guy like Mo does better than anyone, is when he walks in a room, he's owning that room, because he's not trying to please the people in the room. He's just going into the room with what he has, with his genuine nature, with his skills, his abilities, his talents, and he's saying, here I am. And it's amazing, too, how the room adapts to him rather than he having to adapt to the room. So that was really special. My relationship, during the season, every game, right around the 6th inning to the mid-7th, we would spend a good 35 minutes together stretching, but mostly talking. And it was all about mindset, but never talking about mindset. It was always about life and approach to things.
Wow, very powerful. And Coach, just want to say thank you once again for your time, and just before we sign off, if there's one last imparting words of wisdom that you could leave with everybody here, one coaching tip, what would it be?
I would simply say trust yourself and know that there's a champion inside of you. It's your job to bring that champion to life every single day. There's days when you're going to question whether that champion is even in there, but it's your job to bring that champion to life. And when you look in the mirror and that's what you see, that's how you'll act and that's how you'll behave. And over time, you will get the champion outcomes that you want. But that all starts when you trust yourself.
Well, thank you so much. And for the audience, hopefully you guys have enjoyed this as much as we did. And until next time, stay humble, stay hungry, and always be a pro.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Athlete CEO Podcast, a production of AWM Capital. Please note that investments and strategies mentioned on this podcast may not be suitable for you. We encourage you to discuss your specific situation with a qualified, certified financial planner. All opinions expressed by podcast participants are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion at AWM Capital or its affiliates. For more information, visit awmcap.com.